Welcome back to The Pride Has Spoken. It's June, it's Pride Month, and all month long we're chatting with LGBTQ survivors. My name is Grace, and this morning I'm here with Evvie. Evvie, how you doing?
Good morning, Grace. I'm doing very well, very well. It's a beautiful Friday summer day here in Boston. So, yeah, excited to get to check in with you about this wonderful series.
It's been really raining here in Toronto a lot, which I think
Mm,
is pretty homophobic of the
yes.
weather in June to just be raining every day. Yeah,
Yes, agreed.
yeah.
I was supposed to do 2 outdoor events tomorrow here in Boston, and it's gonna rain for both of them, and that objectively is homophobic.
Annoying. Well, we're off to a great start. Last week we chatted with Carla, and this week, as folks can see from the podcast title or the YouTube description, wherever you're watching, this week I'm very excited. We are chatting with Survivor 42 contestant. Hi, I'm very excited.
I'm so excited, and, I think it's okay to say at this time the recording is set. You've talked to Hi
Yeah,
already.
we talked
Yeah.
to Hi. Yeah,
And you were just saying to me, and I was like, wait, save it for the
yeah.
pod. This is interesting. That maybe you went in thinking, when you're talking to these queer survivor contestants, that they might be feeling their queerness as like, oh, I'm nervous about that in regard to being on the show. And you were saying that hasn't been your experience, like having actually now talking to more people.
No, I think so. Definitely, Carla. Definitely starts because when I'm thinking about questions about my queerness, I feel like the way I navigate the world, I talk about this all the time, that you have to come out all the time, and I feel
Mhm.
like I'm just as often, like, it really depends on the space for me about whether I am going to come out. And we get into this, actually, I love this conversation with Hi. Hi talks about not coming out to his the hairdresser he had for a long time,
Mm,
even though he
mm.
was out for a long time. Just all these people we talk about, like when you go to pick up them, like something at the mail, maybe your like ID isn't like or whatever, all of this stuff, right? And I feel like I navigate the world with a little bit more trepidation, and so I think I imposed that when I was thinking about when we are going to interview Carla, and Carla was just like, "No, I'm really confident." He's like, "Oh, that's awesome," and it just completely like shifted my
Yeah.
I think my thinking in terms of like approaching that interview last week and with chatting with Carla, because she had so much confidence, and I felt like I was maybe like, yeah, imposing my, like, my little shy gayness, queerness, sometimes I have in the world, onto Carla. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's so interesting, and I think, yeah, people move through the world in different ways, and I think I really, when I was doing the interviews for the last season, I was, like, very clear that for me also, I was, like, just very excited to share my queerness with the world, and that was, like, a
Right.
big motivation for me being on the show. But when I was talking to some of the people who had been on the show longer ago, like Amy or things like that, I was like, well, for them, I'm sure it was something that they were super nervous about. And Amy also was like, oh no, I was just like, that's a piece of me, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that people who would be nervous about it, there's anything bad about that. I just think maybe reflective of the type of queer person that would be on a reality TV show. And also, I think, also different types of queerness and, things like this. But yeah, it's cool to see how much, especially I think these new era people, but even in the past, actually, I guess I feel like this, like the newer people, it's like I wanted to be on the show because I'm queer, feels like a huge part of it. And maybe some of the people longer ago is more like, well, yeah, it's like, that is a piece of me and I wanted to be on the show.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's certainly we talk with Hi a lot about there's a very funny conversation about Hi trying to figure out the theme of the season, because Hi had not seen 41,
Right.
and so wondering whether, like, seeing a lot of queer people and wondering if that was actually part of the theme. But I think that's like really interesting in terms of I think that the difference is potentially in ways in which it can both be expressed in, like, being proud. I mean, that's Pride
Hmm.
Month. In earlier seasons, potentially being the only queer person and then feeling the burden of that
Hmm.
weight and wanting
Hmm.
to make sure that you represent your community well, which is too much of a burden for somebody. And
Hmm.
so, but then
Hmm.
also now there's also, like, I think that this way in which it's like, oh well, I can be me, and knowing that my queerness will be, might be part of the show. I think we talk about that as well, that that a lot of queer women have been on the show, but that's not their story. And so I'm very excited for preview of who we're interviewing next week, because I think that will be a big part of the story. But I think there's a little bit more ways in which, like, okay, I'm not the only queer person, but also how exciting that there are a bunch of queer people And so yeah, I think it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. That thing of, yeah, when you're the only, that's like so much pressure, and you can't just be you then, because you
Right.
are holding that burden, or you need to like separate yourself from that in some way. And yeah, that makes so much sense. And I'll say, for me, like, when people knew that I was like, people in my community knew I was going to be on the show, they all thought it was going to be straights versus gays.
I mean,
Like,
yeah,
to a
I've
T.
yeah, I mean, now I've pitched this all gay season, but now, yeah, High also suggested maybe it was straights versus gays, and then when the math didn't work, maybe straights versus gays versus bis.
First, oh my God.
A three tribe form. They
Amazing.
really love the three tribe format on Survivor.
That would also
So.
be very Survivor, to do something that's like on the face, like very like inclusive, but also like completely not the point, to do like a super like binary or trinaryized
Right,
war of the
right.
sexualities. Like,
And how mad we'd be when like the gays go to the first like 4 tribal councils.
yeah, that
Yeah,
would be.
they'd have to pivot pretty hard on, like, I think we need to do a tribe swap pretty quick. Yeah.
Oh
One of the
man.
interesting things that comes up is the word queer, which
Mm.
I think I would love to chat with you about, because we talk in the interview about it's not a word that everybody loves,
Mhm. Mhm.
especially, I don't want to stereotype, but older gay men seem to be the most, which
Mhm.
completely makes sense, because I joke that like the F word, the word faggot, is a word that was used to like, as so much of an insult when I was a kid, that I'm not ready to like try to
Mhm.
reclaim that word. I had a
Mhm.
friend who jokingly would always be like, no, you have to call me that. I'm reclaiming it. I was like, I can't, damn it, I can't. But queer is a word that I feel like has been really reclaimed, to the point where like
Mhm.
I use it all the time and feel like really broadly, but it is a word that not everybody loves. But I love it because of how I feel like it's so. Actually, I didn't say this in the pod, but one of the ways I actually like it is that I feel like sometimes I like making other people, like straight people, I'll
Mhm.
be like, I'm
Mhm.
queer, and they're like, yeah, but what does that actually mean? I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't need to like own anything to you. We talk a little bit about like labels, how important they are when you come out, and maybe less so. And that's why I like
Mhm.
the term queer. Do you have a relationship with the term? I think you use the word
Yeah,
queer.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think it's such an interesting conversation, because yeah, for me, queer has always felt like, or quickly in my coming out, felt pretty clear that that is the right word for me. Like, for me, in addition to everything like cool and rad and like political that I feel like queer has wrapped up in it, it's just
Yes.
like, for me, because it's not a word that is so it feels like not rigid about what it means in terms of like what type of people you like to have sex with. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Right.
a
Right.
um I think of it as a word that could mean a lot of different like specific types of like preferences, but it's like kind of like, you're not straight and you're rad and you're, and this is a good word for you, or that's it's a good word for me. Um However, when I was doing, and I didn't really think much about that, honestly. It feels like a word that is around in my community a lot. But as I was as the show was airing and I was like posting more and more, I was seeing, especially as you said, especially from like older, not just gay men, but like older LGBTQ people in general, um a really like dislike of the word, and especially a dislike of like feeling that like it's a shorthand for me to say like the queer community, to mean like
Right.
really all LGBTQIA plus people.
Mhm.
And I really learned in posting about the show that that is definitely not a word that feels good for everybody, that I would want to be including when I am typically saying that word. Um, and so that has led me to, I think, in this series, for example, I try to use LGBTQIA plus when I'm referring to like broad everybody that I'm trying to refer to, because I know that
Right.
there are people for whom it doesn't feel like a word that they like for themselves. But for me, and I think a lot of people, in like our general age bracket, it feels like a really powerful, awesome word um, to use for ourselves and like to have reclaimed. Um, and yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel, I also, and I feel similar about the word dyke. I don't know how people, I don't know
Mm.
how anti some people are out, but I fucking, well, whatever. We're here.
Me
I
too.
love,
Yeah. You
yeah,
love it?
I love it. For me, it feels
Yeah.
like I'm like a queer non-binary dyke. Feels like probably the uh some good words for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, lots of cities have like dyke marches and
Yeah.
like, you know, it's like, yeah, it certainly has been reclaimed. Yeah, I love it and I don't want to stop using it. And I also think I don't know how to for these people who the word was so weaponized, I don't know how to balance those two things and figure out. I mean, I guess one thing I would say, I guess, is I mean, one of the things you know, that I've heard this a lot. Actually, there's a great. I love the Hollywood. I think it's a Hollywood Reporter does these actor roundtables. And there was someone had used the word from Abbott Elementary used the word Indian when referring to an indigenous person. She said, actually, like, I'm gonna stop and just let you know. And she's like, thank you so much. We always have to learn. I'm so glad, like, you taught me. And then she says, but to be more like, and like the more specific you can actually be, like if you're talking about all indigenous people, then yes, you can indigenous people. But if you're actually talking about like people who live in this area of the country, you should be really specific. So I think about that a lot too, in terms of like, if like you actually are talking about gay men, then you can just talk about gay men or like this thing affects lesbians or whatever. And yeah, I just don't know, like, I love queer community, but I get that it impacts people differently. So
no, I think you know, I think it's all about like I think it's especially when you're referring to, and I think this makes so much sense about what you just said about specificity. And this is also what I said. We talked about this a little bit in my Ponderosa video in a piece with Tiffany. Like, whatever word someone uses for themselves is the word they want you to use for them. So if you're talking to a person and they're like, I'm a lesbian, don't say that person's queer. Say they're a lesbian because that's the word that they've used for them. And I think that's probably where you get into the most uncomfortable, like people will be the most uncomfortable if you use the wrong word specifically to refer to them. And so I just like always encourage people to just use the word, identify people as they've identified themselves to you, and don't make any assumptions of other words that, you know, feel good for them. But I do think I don't think there's anything wrong with like referring to, you know, the queer community. I know what you mean. I think most people listening to this know what you mean, but I think, you know, it's just important to think about your audiences. And like, I think wait, I had that. Oh, I was gonna say this in the first time I met Jeff in the casting process, the first thing he asked me, because in my video I say queer a million times, and the first thing he asked me was like, actually, no, the first thing he asked me was when I cut my hair. And the second thing, because my video had a lot of long hair vids because it was COVID and I had to use like old vids. So we talked about that. And in that, I'm sure I said the word queer again, because then he asked me if he's allowed to say the word queer. So like Jeff was not as experienced with like the reclamation of that word by our community. And probably like it occurred to me, I was like, wow, the last time he's maybe like thought about this word was like Rudy saying it negatively about Rich, you know.
Actually, to be fair to Rudy, he very much uses like, yeah, this is a homosexual, you know. I guess he does say the word queer, but
I think he says, I think it's in there. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. It felt really cool to me that like we're in the same arc where like literally I'm talking to the same person who was the host of the show, who, you know, that was happening, and now he's talking to me. You can tell him that like people our age and are loving that word now for us. And yes, you can use it. And yes, it would actually be the word I would want you to use for me.
That's awesome.
And please don't use a different word.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. The interview with Hai is so great. I'm so excited for people to listen to. I think very interestingly, this is one of the cases where this is Hai's second ever podcast.
Wow.
Did a Bitter Jurors podcast on the season 44 finale. And then this one, there was very little postseason press for Survivor 42. So this is, you know, and I will say, we do talk about Survivor. Certainly there's a very interesting conversation about one of my favorite scenes of all time between Hai and Romeo, and how Hai actually felt about that scene. Very excited. Give a little sneak peek. But this is really one of the first times that Hai has talked about his Survivor experience on a podcast. So I'm very excited that people get to listen to it. And it's a great conversation with Matt, Hai, and myself, I think. I'm biased, but yeah.
I can't wait to listen.
All right. Well, we'll head to the interview now, and Evvie and I will be back when it's all done.
All right, everybody. It is Matt Scott here, and it's my distinct honor, privilege, joy to introduce the audacious, the rambunctious, the astute, the humorous, the political, the beautiful skinned member of the Survivor community, the one and only Hi, welcome.
Hello, hi Matt, hi Grace.
Hi.
You know where I thought you were going with that?
Oh, no.
The three words I used to describe myself in my bio were audacious, astute, and aggressive.
And dog owner.
And dog owner.
Dog owner. Multiple dogs.
Oh my gosh.
She knew we were starting, so.
I was gonna say I felt like it was a lot to like throw aggressive onto you too, but I mean, thank you for being here, and you know, we love all the things that you are. Hi, we're happy to celebrate you here today. And who's barking in the background?
That's Daisy. That's my little pitty.
Mhm.
So they're all reactive. So like if I say the H word, like the greeting, they
Yes.
think someone's in the house, so they start barking. Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
They're pretty reactive, and I'm not looking for solutions.
no, I'm sorry. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's
fair
right.
enough.
Embrace that energy.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
love it. Be loud, be proud. That's what Pride Month is all about. So
right.
thank you, Daisy, for that. But yes, thank you for being here. How are you
I'm
doing?
really happy to be here. This is my second podcast ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane to think about. And actually something I kind of realized in the process too of just getting ready. Like Grace and I like to check out like other interviews and things. And yeah, it's wild that this has been your second podcast ever. Weird question. How does it feel?
It's fun. I love to talk. I love to hear the sound of my own voice. So this, I think, is a natural fit. I think 42 is pretty elusive when it comes to the podcast realm. So it is fun for me to listen in on like my castmates and to hear their thoughts as well. Now that we are allowed to do podcasts.
Except Marianne. Marianne is not elusive on Marianne's been on a lot of podcasts. Yeah. No
Love
shade to
Marianne.
Marianne. I love Marianne.
Yeah, I love Marianne.
This is
And
you're on the Bitter Jurors pod, right? I believe you're talking
Yeah.
the season 44 finale. So people, if you're listening to that and you listen to that one, you have 100% of highest podcasting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
There we go. And yeah, I mean, one question I have for you, Hi, like even just in that context, because I feel like for people who've been on Survivor, and no, if anyone's listening, this will not be a deep dive into your experience on the season, going move by move or anything like that. But I guess I wonder, like, how did it feel to not, or how does it feel to like, how did it feel to not share your experience up until this point? I ask that because it almost seems like when people are like voted out or when the season's over, they're just like so thankful to be able to talk about it without the filters of like spoilers and everything else. But I don't know. Have you had a yearning to share your story, or have you kind of just been like past it?
I think originally I was like a little upset, right? I think as a fan of the show, like you expect as part of your experience post-show to be able to provide deep dives and to talk freely about your experience. And I think as a result of my cast not being able to talk per NDA for a year, it made it a little difficult to explain your game and to explain the strategy. But I think like over the past year, I've learned to kind of love the fact that I wasn't able to, I guess, justify my moves and make excuses or whatever way you want to kind of explain yourself, right? And I think the beauty in this experience and not being able to talk about it is like, it is what it is. Like that is what is aired. That is the story that was seen by millions of people. And I think for like most people who watch the show, like that's sort of where it ends. And I think for like a very small group of Survivor fans, like they want more. And it's unfortunate that they weren't able to hear more or receive more information from my season. But I think it's sort of almost poetic and beautiful that when the show ends, that's all there is. And as someone who was on the season, like you learn to live with it and you sort of learn to embrace what was seen. And I think that is sort of like my view on life overall is like, you know, no opportunity is guaranteed. Nothing is promised. And like, you have to make the best with what you're given.
Yeah, it's powerful. And I mean, I think that leads into one question that we like to start out with, because a lot of viewers of the show, a lot of listeners or viewers of the podcast may have their own idea of who you are.
Yeah.
But of course, that's only part of your story, a very limited part of your story. So we'd love to know in your words, sorry for giving you an existential crisis with this one, but like, who are you?
Well, I am a 30-year-old Vietnamese refugee. I immigrated to the US when I was 3. I am a proud queer man. I think if you would have asked me a year, 2 years ago, I probably wouldn't have used the word queer. I think I've been on a journey with my identity. I think that was like being on the show was a huge catalyst for me in a lot of different areas of my identity, and like trying to understand more of like who I am, what I represent, what I believe in. I am a huge animal lover. I have 4 pets. They are my children. They're all around me right now, actually. I am happily engaged to my partner of 6.5 years. We live in New Orleans together, and we've built this incredible life together. And I did not know or think that that was something that I was capable of having, especially as a young queer man. I am a analytics professional by trade, but I don't identify myself by my occupation. That was just like a quick little, I had to throw that in, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I am a normal person who was given the opportunity to play a game that he loved and present myself in my rawest form to America, and left the show with like a renewed vision and version of myself and my story.
I think we fell in love with you immediately when you started with the blood in episode 1. We knew that you were gonna play hard, and it was so fun. I want to dive into, we talk about like the term queer, but I do think like Matt, I'm gonna get hung up on the pets. You have 4 pets. What are all their names, and what are they? Yeah,
I have 3 dogs.
Yes.
My firstborn that we got from the shelter, her name is Lucy. She's a Jack Russell. She's 6. And then my beagle, Basil, he's 3. He's a pandemic puppy that I rehomed at the very start of the pandemic. Like literally, I got home from finals casting, and then the pandemic hit like 2 weeks later. And I knew like we were going to be in for the long haul, because I was like, this is a global pandemic. Like, this is not going to be like a 1-month thing. I got a new puppy to my then boyfriend's. Like, he was not very happy with me getting a second dog, but that is a different story for a different day.
I'm sure it's great, because then you do have 3 dogs, so we'll see how this one goes.
Yeah, and then I found a kitten at the park after the 4th of July, so scooped him right up. And then my latest is my pit bull Daisy, who we found after a hurricane in a nearby neighborhood, and she was probably a week away from death. So pulled her into my home, thinking that we were going to foster her for a little bit and find her own forever home. But because of her breed, I think a lot of people were hesitant to give her a chance. And, after 4 months, I was just like, no, you're mine. You're going to be mine forever. So that is my little family.
That's so cute.
I have to ask. I'm just going to dive in before we even get more into things, like, because it's so remarkable actually that like you and I guess a lot of your castmates, and maybe there are like a ton of Survivor players out there, the more I think about, who like haven't been able to just speak about their lives, but like, I love New Orleans. New Orleans is an amazing city. Like, I'm just so curious about like how you grew up in New Orleans, or where, and I don't know, just want to give you the chance to talk about like such a vibrant place.
Yeah, I'm actually from Atlanta. I followed my partner here 5 years ago because he was in med school, and then he matched here for residency, and that's where we are settled. And I think for a long time, and I actually love this question, like I think for a long time, I like resisted this city. Like I was. And I felt it was because I sacrificed a lot of my young adult life to move here to be with my partner and to support him. And it wasn't anyone's decision but my own. But at that stage in my life, like mentally, I was blaming my life decisions on the circumstance and like my partner's career choice. And I wasn't doing myself any favors by living in this beautiful city and fighting him at every step of the way, right? And fighting the city at every step of the way and refusing to allow myself to like enjoy it. And then the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
And it was just like this stark contrast of like the city that I like lived in and like was fighting, but also like recognized as something that was quite lovely and vibrant and fun. And when that was gone, you know, it's that old saying, like, you know, be grateful for what you have before it's gone. And that's literally how I felt when Mardi Gras was gone and all the tourists were gone and all of the vibrancy was taken away. And then as soon as life started becoming a lot more familiar and people started coming back into the city and the festivals started happening again, I leaned all the way in. And it really wasn't until like the last year and a half that I really recognized the city for what it is, which is this incredible energy of a place that really makes everyone feel so loved and seen. And I have found so much community here over the last year and a half. And I'm actually at the point in my life where I'm like, I actually don't want to leave New Orleans. So I went from like fighting my partner being here to this is my home. And it's going to take a lot for me to leave. So yeah, I think New Orleans is incredible.
I also think New Orleans is incredible. One of my favorite places I've been. Yeah.
It's
yeah,
like
it does.
You're a city in America too.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are shocked when they come here and they're like, where are the gay bars? I'm like, baby, step into any bar.
Yeah, I think it's because it's like, you know, I went to Voodoo Fest in New Orleans for Halloween, and I think like driving to the south, I was like pretty, you know, I'm like nervous. I was like, I was not out as trans at the time, but being like out as like queer, I was like, yeah, I don't know if this is like going to be safe. And you just get to New Orleans and it was just the party and it was fun. So yeah.
Hi, you mentioned so you walk into a bar, you get the gay scene essentially, but like, what is, because this is Pride Month, like, I have to ask, like, what is the gay scene in New Orleans? Any places you want to shout out? Any places you'd recommend in particular? Like, let's get into it. I feel like this is the demographic that's listening and could use your travel tips, basically.
I actually I want to be like really specific with my word choice. Like, I don't think New Orleans is necessarily gay, but I think it's incredibly queer. And I think there's a big distinction, right? Like growing up in Atlanta, like Atlanta is a gay city. And what I mean by that is like you go into a gay bar and it's predominantly a space for gay men who are seeking sex or proximity to other gay men for whatever purpose. And I think in New Orleans, most of the spaces that I frequent are queer. It's inclusive. It's not necessarily people who are just looking for sex. It's a space where you could talk to anyone and feel safe. And that's what I mean by queer, right? Like it's filled with people of varying gender like expressions and ideologies and sexual orientations, but beyond that, it's counterculture. It's people who kind of reject a lot of what like we've been told to expect or to assimilate to, especially in the South, where like beyond race and sexuality, we also have problems related to class and wealth, right? So I think like New Orleans is one of like the most interesting cities where all of these issues kind of blend together to create a culture that sort of rejects a lot of it, and people embrace each other and allow each other to thrive in a way that I've never seen before in other cities, especially in the South.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, so you talked early on about, you know, it took you a little while to feel comfortable sort of self-identifying as queer. It's the same thing with me. I think that what I love about the word queer now is sort of how all-encompassing it is, how I think for so many people who are queer, or you know, fall into the LGBTQIA community, labels are so important to you at the beginning when you're trying to figure out who you are and try to match that label with how you're feeling inside. And I don't know, for me, I found that like the longer I was out, the less a specific label mattered to me. And that's why I love the term queer, and that it can be sort of like all encompassing in a way. I don't know if that's like the same experience as you. I'm interested in hearing sort of your journey to sort of finding the term queer. So because it's a word that I think also some of us, it's not a slur for my like from when I was a child, the term faggot was the one that was like used for me as a kid, not the term queer. And so I have a much harder, I've talked to my friend with him, I have a much harder term, like trying to reclaim that word, whereas like queer, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. But I know that's not the case for everybody. So yeah, I'm just wondering about your journey in that.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with sort of that sentiment of like your identity evolves as you continue to grow and mature, and you have to have language that evolves with it in order to be able to kind of explain your story. And I think queer, for a lot of like gay people, especially older gay people who reject the term, comes from a lot of trauma where it was used pretty derogatorily when they were younger. And being gay was not as socially acceptable. So like, I definitely understand like the hesitation and the frustration with older gay men who like reject that word. But I'm also of the mindset that like language evolves, right? Like 20 years ago, we didn't have like neurodivergent, like that wasn't a concept that was familiar to us. Like mental illness was probably used exclusively as a derogatory term to describe people who were quote unquote crazy, right? So like we are entering as a society, this era where we have very specific words to describe very specific experiences. And if you identify with those experiences, amazing, use that language. And if you don't, that's okay too. But I think like as a community, that word has been a little divisive. And I think it's because we aren't able to give each other enough grace to understand like why certain people have like hesitation for it. And I, instead of like yelling, at David Sedaris to sit his like sit his ass down and like learn, and I've tweeted about David Sedaris specifically, and I maybe might have been a little quick to judge him, and then I gave myself a second to put myself in his shoes to understand, like as an older gay man, like that word probably triggers a lot of trauma for him. So it's really hard to write off other people's experiences that you don't necessarily agree with. So I think we all need to just be a little more understanding.
Yeah, and I don't know what the solution is in terms of like I do use the word like queer community a lot, and I don't know if that's something I should be more conscious of or not, because I do love the way it is all encompassing. It feels inclusive in a way, but I know that that's not the experience for some folks. So
yeah, it's interesting too, just like thinking about that and your relationship with queerness. And we talked about how little is out there, especially like about your Survivor experience. But one of the things that I did before this interview, taking your drink of water, making sure like I don't know where you're gonna go, Matt, like is that I watched your audition video or videos on YouTube, which was interesting.
Videos, there's more than one.
I don't know. I have no clue. It was like 4 minutes long or something like that. But I think the thing about it that I thought was interesting is like you were talking about something that Grace mentions often or references often, which is this idea of coming out or like being outed, unfortunately. And I'll give all of the credit in the world to Grace as we podcast about all of the queer things, is just this idea of like constantly coming out. Like I even came out to somebody today at a restaurant, walking in in there, and it just like came up, and so I think that like we're so interested in like giving you the space to speak about like what has your relationship been with like actually identifying and embracing that I don't want to say just the queer identity, but like your identity overall in this community.
Yeah, I think I used to be really hesitant to continuously come out to the people around me. And I think that stems from like protecting my space, and also like just like conserving my energy and not having to like constantly explain myself. Because I agree, as queer people, it is something that is, the onus is always on us to explain ourselves, right? And like for a long time, even though I was out, there were people in my life that did not know my sexual orientation. And like very specifically in this instance that I'm thinking of, like my hairstylist that I had since I was like 15 back in Atlanta, who is this like older Vietnamese woman that I went to ever since I was like a sophomore in high school. And like I would continuously go to her even as an adult, like post college before I moved to New Orleans. And for the longest time, you know, sitting in her chair, she would ask me questions about my life, including like, you know, like, are you dating anyone? Like, do you have a girlfriend? And for the longest time, because I've been going to her for 8 years, I'm just like, I didn't know how to quite come out to her.
Yeah.
And I feel like didn't want to come out to her.
Right.
And it's so interesting because like when I moved to New Orleans, I was like, the one thing that I was like really looking forward to was getting a new hairstylist, because I was like, oh my gosh, like I get to like be myself. And then guess what happened? I find a new hairstylist.
Oh no.
So a Vietnamese woman. And like one of the first things that she asked me was like, are you like dating anyone? Do you have a girlfriend? And you know what I said? No, I don't have a girlfriend. That's it.
I mean, factual information. Hi.
Something about hairstylists, by the way. I have to say, I relate so much to this. Like in black, like as a black person, anyone listening to this, I'm black. Like going to black barbershops too, and like having a barber, and they for some reason they always want to know your relationship status, and it's like, no, I don't. I don't have a girlfriend.
And it's not that I thought my new hairstylist would care, but I like very much fell back into the same feeling of being burdened or feeling small, or like not wanting to explain myself to someone that maybe comes from like culturally, like, yes, we're both Vietnamese, but a different time. And I didn't necessarily want to have that conversation. And it was something that I really regretted. And then my current stylist now is a lot younger. And like literally the first thing I told her was like, I have a boyfriend. So I just wanted to get that out of the way.
We don't talk about coming out to our hairstylist enough, really, in the queer community. No, I was, you know, I went to buy it was my mom's birthday recently, and I went to go buy her earrings, and it's just like, sometimes I dress more feminine, sometimes I'm just like the way I'm at, and this was like, oh, like, hope it's not today. Like, boys are always buying their like jewelry at the last minute. I was buying my mom earrings. It's just like, oh, like, do I like that feeling of like, we're in this like moment where I can choose to come out or I'm not going to come out. Right. And like, is it important for me in this moment? Like, maybe they won't sell me the earrings. And I found the perfect pair of I know that would like be because I often say this, that like, yes, that would be like discriminatory and illegal, but the onus would be on me to be like, to go to the paper, to go like to file a complaint, you know? And it's just like, that's not worth it. I just want to get the friggin' earrings and like get out of here now, you know? So I think that like, it's really interesting talking, like there's obviously the like coming out to your family piece and like friends and whatever, but all these like interactions you have with people who are like, you do know them, but you don't know, you know what I mean? Like a hairdresser. I think it's a really fascinating example you gave of like, when we have to come out or not.
And it's funny because like when we talk about identity and like coming out, right? Like there are so many examples in my life from like non-queer people who like, they're like constantly also have experiences where like they have to decide whether or not they want to come out in a specific situation. And like something that's pretty common in the South is like political ideology, especially for white people in the South. So I have a lot of like progressive white friends, right? And one of the more common things that I hear from them is like, they actually run into a lot of situations where like they meet other people and they're unsure of their political affiliation.
Right.
Like there's always like this awkward phase where like they're getting to know each other and they like, they think the person they're getting to know and like is like progressive. So like there's this moment of like you're progressive, right? Like, so like to me, like life is so fascinating because we're so good at categorizing ourselves based on whatever. We're constantly in varying stages of coming out and letting people know who we are. And I don't think that's just restricted to sexual orientation, but it relates to a lot of things that pertain to identity. And I think
I wish I could find this TikTok. There's a great TikTok series of a guy who kind of does a spoof on this, where he's pretending he's having a conversation with his friends, so he's trying to get to know them, and it'll be like, that's very transgressive, and then he like looks to see like their reaction to the word trans, or like yes. So I feel like we're all close together. Such like a union is like looking to see what they're, it's very funny. I don't know the name of that TikTok, but it's very funny. So I'll just claim that joke as my own.
Yeah, it's yours.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think it's like it's interesting talking about this, and you know, something that I know that you've talked about a little bit before, Hi, is even just like that process of coming out, but the aspect of that story that I think is really interesting, again, in the context of a world where even with your hairstylist, there is like a need or an opportunity to come out sometimes, is just the story that you've shared before, which you know, I don't think that all the our listeners are necessarily aware of, but like coming out to your mom in, you know, under those circumstances. And I don't know, I'm just kind of curious. Maybe this is like a wild question, but is there like do you have like a power ranking of coming out moments? Like, do you have like any moments that stand out to you, especially in terms of coming? I don't know if it's that experience with your mom or otherwise, but that one jumps out to me, especially for this conversation, because so often when we talk about coming out, it's like this negative thing where, you know, like horrible things could happen or people could be ostracized. And like that is a trigger. And one of the reasons that we don't always come out in these different situations. But maybe it's not a power ranking, but I think like I'm curious from you, like if there's any stories like that do jump out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like beyond coming out to my mother, which was like not a great experience, like in it, like the crux of it was like she was really upset when she realized that I was gay. Not because I was actually gay, but because for so many years I had spent denying to her, even though she would just straight up ask me about my sexual orientation. And, you know, and it's something that queer people understand, as we all have a journey, and it isn't until you're fully comfortable with your identity that you're willing to talk about it. And I just at that point was not willing to talk about it with her. But that probably isn't like for me the the hardest coming out experience was to my very best friend growing up. My best friend growing up was this is this beautiful woman that I grew up with since like elementary school. And we were so close. Like I would spend every day after school with her. Her family probably recognized that I was queer long before I did, because they would allow me to hang out much too late at her house.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because like our relationship was very queer coded, and like looking back at it, but like she had no like idea, right? And there was one moment where I had realized that I was gay and I desperately wanted to tell her. And this is so cliche, but we were like driving down the road together and there was this big ass rainbow on the road. And we're both looking at it. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell her right now. I'm going to tell her.
Oh my gosh.
And she's just like, isn't that rainbow beautiful? And I was like, yep. All right. Let's.
Oh man, I was hoping. I think I knew where that story was going, and I still wanted you to tell your best friend in the car when you saw the rainbow.
I did not tell her then, but I did tell her a few months later at Pride.
Hell yeah.
And it was so funny because like, her reaction was, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, oh, like, remember when I got you that striped shirt and I joked that gay men love striped shirts? Why didn't you tell me then? I was like, that's what you're thinking of.
It's so fun. Yeah. So my mom also asked me if I was gay, and so I said yes, and that's how I came out to my mom. I was having a completely different crisis, and she's like, is this also? And I was like, actually no, but sure, now's the time, let's do it, because I have this other, you know, crisis going on in my life. And one of the first person I ever told I was gay was one of maybe not, but my best friend, who I had like come out to in high school. And I did this where I would like, I'm gay, and then I'm like, no, I'm just kidding. But she did cry when I came out, which I think is she like was maybe in love with me. But that's, you know, that's how it goes, you know.
That's a whole other podcast, I feel like, too, that we have to get into that too, Grace. But no, it's like interesting too, Hi, because like I totally identify with your experience, like literally growing up where my mom was like, are you gay? Like just different experiences. And I think for me especially, like as a like, and I just I love the word queer because I'm like, that's like the simplest way to explain things. Or, you know, and we've talked about this before, Chris, like being bisexual or being someone who's like also attracted to women too. It's like complicated where you're like, I don't even fully know. And you're asking me this question in a way that feels really uncomfortable and unsafe.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I identify so much with what you're saying, though, of the like, there's the level to it of like almost the fact that we, for whatever reason, whether it's like protecting ourselves or not fully knowing, like this idea of like deceiving people unintentionally, though, because it's all about like us and us protecting ourselves, which is fully justified. And, you know, it also, I feel like a lot of my questions that come to mind are actually things that Grace has like planted in my head, because I'm thinking about, you know, Survivor, and Grace, I feel like I want to hand it to you to ask your
You want
famous
to ask
question.
the question that I thought you would hate, which is,
Yeah,
I think there's
I
this
won't take it
interesting
from you.
thing that queer people experience where you live a portion of your life where
Yeah.
you know you're gay or you know you're trans or whatever, but you're not ready to come out because society sucks. And and like telling your best friend, like, she's like, why didn't you tell me then? And your mom being like, why didn't you tell me? It's like, it's not you specifically. It's because your
Right.
society sucks so much that there's a chance that when I tell you, you will cave into societal pressure and abandon me, right? Like you will like end our friendship. That's the actual
Yeah.
fear. But I talk about this time where you have accepted it within yourself, but there's still a time where you're not ready to tell anybody else. And I use it because it's a time where we actively lie to people. Someone will say, are you gay? And you say, no. Or like, you're worried, you know. And I actually think that like maybe that's good survivor training, which I feel like seems silly, but it's like you know, you're in this, we're like, I don't want to be in alliance with you, I don't want to vote with you, but like I'm gonna say yes because I need to think that you need to think that I'm being genuine with you in this moment. I don't know. Does that resonate at all with you? I don't know if it does. And
I
never want to give
saying,
No,
I think
sneaky
you're going to
liars. It's not what I'm
I
saying.
completely,
Yeah, exactly.
I get the question. Like, like
Mhm.
there is something about like the queer experience where you are put into situations where you either feel uncomfortable or unsafe, and like you're going to say what you need to in order to like get out of that situation. And like I think a lot of people see that as like deceptive, right? Like lying is like inherently deceptive, but I think like it's nuanced, and like there's context that is important. And because of people's safety, like I think a lot of queer people will often choose to lie to protect themselves. And I think with that ability, like there is a certain level of creativity when we are lying, that allows us to survive, right? So I think like when you watch the show as a queer person, and I think that's why like Survivor is very queer coded, and like it has a huge queer following, because we as like our community likes to celebrate people who are like very good at thinking on their feet and are good at getting themselves out of situations, or like quote unquote manipulating other people, not because we are like celebrating like the act of someone behaving badly, but we're celebrating creativity and like ingenuity. And I like, for me as like a young queer person watching the show, I never like thought lying was bad. And probably that was related to the fact that I was lying about like a lot of aspects of my life at that point. And I didn't necessarily view people being deceptive as inherently bad. And like, this is so fascinating because I talk about this all the time with people from the community, which is like, there's such a difference between how casuals view the Survivor viewing experience versus diehard fans. And I'll give you an example. Like, I think Omer on my season, incredible strategist, like masterful, like lied out the wazoo, because like that was a strategy and it was incredible and he got what he wanted. But like a lot of like my casual friends would still like ask me to this day and be like, are you friends with Omer? I'm like, yes, absolutely. And they're like, why? Like, he's such like a villain. He's such like an asshole. And I'm just like, that's so interesting, because like as part of like the community, like I pretty much like hold Omer to like this very like high regard because of his ability to execute as a strategist. But to casuals, they haven't been able to kind of put their like morals and their expectations at the door for what they deem is good versus bad. And they're not able to like enjoy the show the same way as like I like diehard fans of the show who have come to expect and respect people who are good at like deception and lying. And I think like that aspect of Survivor will like never change. And I think that's why it's such like a fascinating experience, is because you never know who people are going to be drawn to, because whoever they're drawn to is really a reflection of like their morals and their identities, which is why, I think everyone is polarizing to some respect, because there's no one who is just universally respected for maybe like a Sari for their choices.
It's been there since the beginning. Richard Hatch versus
exactly.
Kelly is like the first the first winner of the show is a gay man, and you have this like the like challenge beast, like the more like it would be entirely, feels like might be an entirely different game if Kelly wins, but like then gets voted into the game back to come for second chances like 30 20 years later. It's really fascinating. It's been there since the beginning.
Yeah, it's the design, it's the literal design of the game. Like
true.
You are encouraged to be bad as a player, because the badder you are, the more fans you have, the more production loves you, the better you do. So we all hop onto that island fully expecting to be like the worst versions of ourselves, and it's the only environment where you're encouraged to do that. And I think it's so crazy, and it's so addicting, because like you can't do that in everyday life, and like nor should you. But Survivor really is one of those rare experiences where you are encouraged to behave badly.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it's interesting to even just to go back to what you mentioned about the perceptions that people have, because I mean, you in particular, just with when your season was, I mean, we went from season 39 and 40, where the diversity initiative, of course, hadn't been in place. And then going into Survivor 41, we're seeing this like incredibly vibrant, diverse cast, increasingly in different ways, integrating different forms of diversity. Grace and I have talked about like a third of this most recent cast, Survivor 44, being queer, which is really phenomenal. And I think I can't wait to like next year get into conversation with some of them and just dive there, because there is so much even about people's stories that didn't represent that. But I'm so curious, like from the perspective of like intersectionality, thinking of your experience as like an Asian man, as a queer person, or a member of this community, like what did you imagine your experience on Survivor would be like? And did you think that those things would be I'm just curious what you expected, especially in terms of your identities going into Survivor.
Yeah, to be honest, I fully expect it to be tokenized.
Yeah.
Right? Because like I had not seen 41. I was not aware that we were in this new era where like obviously I saw the casting was different, and I was like, oh, amazing. But then like once we were finally able to talk to one another, I was like, oh, you're queer too? Oh, you're queer too? Oh, you're queer too? I was like at Ponderosa, I was like trying to like figure out like the theme of our cast. And I was just like, oh man, it's like gays versus
Imagine we have been pitching all gay season of Survivor, Probst, if you're listening, but gays versus straights might be, I don't know.
No,
the math was like not working out. I was like, oh man, maybe there's some bisexuals too.
3 tribes.
Yeah, because I was like, there's me. I'm like, there's Romeo. And like in full transparency, like I had clocked Romeo like before we were even on the island. Like we were in the same casting group, and like I found him on Instagram, and I was like, oh, hey queen. I was like fabulous. And then when I saw him, I was like, oh, number 2. And then Jackson was wearing like a Golden Girls shirt. I was like, number 3. And then Mike came out in like, I swear, like the shortest booty shorts I've ever seen in my life for breakfast. And I was like, him too? Really?
Oh my gosh.
I fully expect it to be tokenized. And when I wasn't, there was definitely a shift in my ability to like move through spaces and the experience like a lot more liberated. And like I say liberated because like I think when you are tokenized, like there is a burden to I don't want to say play into like the character or the archetype, right? But like there's an expectation of like, oh man, like everything I'm gonna say like might just be reduced down to like my sexuality, like, and I did not want that. And I'm not saying like that would have happened, but I think I felt a lot better when I was like, oh my god, there's 2 of us, like let's kiki, and like let's be friends, right? And even with like Lydia, like she was telling me very early on that she identified as queer, and I was like, wait, really? I was just like, what is this like new kind of like casting, because I had never seen anything like it before, and it really made me feel very good.
Does that make half your cast? Because or your tribe, right? Between Lydia,
Yes,
Chanel, and you.
Chanel, but I had no idea. Like Chanel was not forthcoming with a lot of stuff, including her identity, including her occupation.
Right.
But yeah, like half of my tribe was queer, and I love that. And that mindset, I hope it continues with like later seasons where people feel empowered to lean into their identities without fear that they'll be reduced to these like one-dimensional characters. One thing I will say though is that because of like the Ultimatum Queer Love, are y'all watching it?
Oh, yeah.
And Evvie
of
is
course.
podcasting about it here on
the
podcast. Yeah.
So like what I take from that series is like, oh my gosh, like we're finally talking about like queer femmes, right? Like queer femme identifying people. Like why has it taken this long to like have their story told? Because like 42, we had multiple queer women. 44, we had multiple queer women, but we're not telling their stories.
Right.
It's a really good point. I will say, I think it is a big missing piece. I think, we talked to Zeke last year about trans women. There's been no trans women on the show, particularly trans women of color. It would be amazing. Also, you want, in that way of wanting to make sure that it's also, a safe experience. Like going on Survivor is hard enough as it is. So wanting to make sure it's a safe experience. But there have been queer women on the show, and that's not part of their story, which is actually just a sneak preview that maybe next week's podcast will, our interview.
Oh.
We'll get into that a little bit. Yeah. Sneak peek.
Yeah. So I think like we're Survivor's really doing an incredible job, but I think there are still steps to be taken to like, if we really wanted to be representative of like everyone that is playing, like there are so many more stories and experiences that we can share with the rest of America.
Can I ask you, because I love the scene with you and Romeo on the beach talking about your identity. It's one of my favorite Survivor scenes of all time. I think it's something feels like you'd never get before, 40 or before. The thing I love about that scene is you're 30, I'm 31. Recently, somebody on this was like maybe even a few years ago, I'd come out and, the photos I post on Facebook are like, like times I've gotten my makeup like done by a professional, and somebody was like, oh my God, you're like trans goals. And I was like, no, I'm like, that's ridiculous. That's so, but it's so weird being like when you come out and, there's many reasons why we don't have like tons of like trans elders, but, or queer elders. But when you find yourself in a moment where like, you're still a young person, but someone is looking up to you in terms of like who you are in terms of your queer identity, which is especially like, it's like almost like it puts me in shock when somebody's like, you've got it all figured out, like as if that's ridiculous. But I just maybe have like gone through some things that person has not gone through yet, if they're like haven't come out or have just come out. I'm so fascinated by like your perspective in terms of that conversation where like you are like the the person like Romeo's talking about like the fact that you are out.
It's I think that scene, I have like the most complicated feelings like of my entire experience on 42. And like I've never talked about this publicly, but like I actually begged production not to air it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it was something that I was very confused about when it happened. Like I love Romeo today, but like we had a very not tense relationship, but it was like very broken because of like the design of the game, the strategy of the game. Like even as two like gay men, like we just could not work together. And for me, like the way that I interpreted the situation was like, are you like using this conversation to like pander to me? Is this strategy? Especially when you like add on the fact that immediately right after, like we had a fractured strategic relationship, and like they're like, and this is like what was largely missing from the edit that people didn't see, like because it goes from Hai and Romeo having this moment to now Hai is targeting Romeo. What happens in between is like right after he comes out to me, we talk about strategy, and the information that I divulged to him made its way back to me. So that was when I approached him and I was like, what's going on? Because now not only is my trust broken, I don't know how to interpret you as a person, and everything you're telling me feels as though it's like a little icky.
Oh, it's so good to learn that you're not homophobic, Hi. I've been holding on to this.
That's what we wanted to talk about, your homophobia. This is an intervention calling you out.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No. It's eye-opening.
And so I begged production not to air it. And it was one of those things where like, I'm so glad that like no one listened to me in that moment, because what I like learned was like that scene was so like significant for so many people. And I'm so glad that I was able to like overcome like my bullshit and my ego and like allowed myself to like understand that scene for what it was, because Romeo really was being so vulnerable and like sharing parts of himself that I would have been so scared if I were him to share at that point in his life. And for me to like reduce that moment down to like gameplay and strategy and like have the audacity to ask them not to share it, I was like, man, that moment is like beyond me. And I'm so glad that it exists and that it was shared, because there's a world where maybe they wouldn't have aired it and we wouldn't have made progress as a community where we're finally like, we have two queer men of color sharing their stories in like a very nuanced way. So, I mean, what I learned from that is like, I don't know, like I learned like your expectations might not always fit with like the reality of the situation, and it's okay to take a breath and to give people grace and to put yourself in their shoes.
You want to give me a lot to a lot of people, it seems. No, I do really love that. I think it's, you know, I think it's perfectly fair for you to wonder if in a moment it's like, is it, you know, as much as that sucks to think that that's the thing, it also, that's like the why Survivor is hard and stresses you mentally, because like, yeah, you start to think like, are you coming out to me? Is coming out to me a game move? Like, is that what you're doing? And it's okay, I think, later to be like, wow, that's really, it was not, that's not what's happening. And to also, I loved the phrasing of like, it's more than you, like this is a moment that Romeo is effectively choosing to come out, right? Like on the like knowing that it can be aired on the show. Big moment. Yeah.
But I just have to add, like, and I think it's really important, like, that you also give yourself grace in the context of that. And I'm like thinking,
I'll come to New Orleans.
Yeah, just give everyone have a little bit of grace. Grace Leeder, everybody. I just feel like giving yourself like that. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to use the word grace again right now. But like giving yourself that's just that understanding. Like, it is Survivor, to Grace's point, and it's a tough environment where, like, I mean, especially when the representation wasn't where it was, like, you're kind of in this tricky situation of like, do I share about my identities in the event that someone might be thinking that I'm using that as a game move? And then you ultimately, like, people have to be voted out and you have to make alliances and turn on people. So it's this really tricky thing. And, you know, it does suck that there is even that thought of like, is this person using their identity for the game? When I think the flip side of that is
they were using it for the game.
Yeah, exactly. Like, use it for the game. Like, that's, you want to be able to use it for the game. And Grace, you're the worst. Thank you for the puns. And I just feel like it's like, you know, you should be able to share of yourself and have space for that representation, even if it might, I guess the part that sucks is like that people might think you're using that to connect with them. Or I think of so many like of my identities as a, like, actually I think of like the world as I navigate it, because being a young Black queer person is not common in many of the spaces I find myself in. I don't want people to think I'm using that, but it's also important to like bring that in, because that representation matters for people. And so it is just really a tricky thing. And I just like love your understanding of like, okay, this is like, I could give Romeo that grace. Grace.
Yeah. And I think it's a large, well, thank you for that. I think a large part of my hesitation coming into the game was like, I fully expected people to use their identities as strategy. Like we've seen it in the past. And like I'll mention Daniel in the context of like his illness, right? Growing up, like, it was something that was brought up, and I recognized that it could have potentially been used as strategy. So when conversations would go back to his leukemia growing up and like what this experience meant for him and who he was representing, I would find myself avoiding all conversations related to that, because what I was very aware that it could have been used and edited to be seen as strategy. And that is something that I think happens a lot. And like one of the most common things, like when people leave the show, not just with my cast, but like 43, 44, like when I'm welcoming people to the community, so many of them are just so nervous and they're on like pins and needles because they're like, oh my gosh, like I'm so scared about like what could be shown. And I was like, and I was like, I get it, because I've been in the situation where like people shared their stories and their identities with me, and then I voted them off. And then they leave and they're upset. And they're like, how could you do that? Because I shared XYZ with you. And then to me, I'm just like, this is like the design of the game. Like, I love you. And I truly loved all of them. Like, this is the design of the game. And being on the other side, I'm like trying to help people understand that, one, it's not that deep. Like, there's really nothing that you could have done unless you're like Jeff Varner to really hurt someone. And if you did hurt someone, like you have the ability to use your words to communicate and to move past it. But I think for a lot of people, like we come into the island and we try to not hurt each other on like such like a personal level tied to our identities, but it's really hard.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, super insightful. I wanted to ask before I think we'll wrap up soon. I'll leave you with the last question. But before that, I know I saw that you said welcoming people to the community. I did see that you and Owen were at Pride. I like that we're going to ask people all month long. How are you celebrating Pride?
Well, I'm partying.
Yes,
I'm a party girl.
Okay.
I went to New Orleans Pride.
Yes.
And then I'm going. Well, I'll be at Southern Decadence in September, and then I'll be in Atlanta for Atlanta Pride in October.
Oh my gosh!
And Owen came to New Orleans for Pride.
Well,
Well,
he's
he
in
lives in
there.
New Orleans.
Oh, he is from New Orleans.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't hang out as much as like I would like. Like he's like pretty close, but like we have very like different schedules. But
Yeah.
what like Owen is definitely the definition of an ally, and his partner Sammy is one of like the nicest.
Sammy is so sweet.
Yeah, truly just like the nicest couple. But beyond that, I think I'm just like bopping around, having fun.
All right.
I think like Pride is something where like it's different for everyone, right?
Yeah.
But I think for me, like I spent so much of my life like being like scared of my identity and scared of allowing myself to have fun that my 30s is definitely the era of just being a crazy bitch.
Yes. Do you remember your first Pride? I remember my first Pride being, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like being out, my first Pride being out was just like the best experience. I'd be like, there's so many gay people. It's like the best.
Yeah. I used to go in high school in Atlanta.
Okay, cool.
My high school had a very like big group of people that would like the faculty would sponsor a trip down to the city. Yeah, it was like
that's awesome.
Super progressive for the time. And it was even before I was out. So I would still go and allow myself to like be present. And really that was what spurred a lot of my confidence as a young queer person, was like that exposure to people who were so authentically themselves and confident. And I would not emulate them, but I would like look towards them as inspiration for like what was possible. And like that's one of my like the joy that I get out of this experience is the messages that I will receive from young queer people that are like how did you do it? Like how are you able to just like be yourself and be confident? And like, you know, like there's no secret sauce to it, but like I just like love to encourage people to lean into the parts of their identities that they're afraid to explore, and I just like want to encourage people to understand like there is so much opportunity and experiences that you will be worthy and capable of receiving if you are open to it, and never be afraid of allowing yourself to have joy. And yeah, like my message to like young queer people who like aren't sure of like what to do is like, be patient, give yourself time, but also be open to the possibilities that await you.
Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. I'm feeling the tears well up in my eyes a little bit, because like there are people, I think the very cool thing for me and for Grace as non-Survivor players is just like hearing how much these conversations and like your words mean to people. And I like can't encourage people enough to reach out and just share that love with you. I feel like for Survivor players overall, and we can go down the list of so many queer Survivor players who this applies to. Like I feel like you all deserve so much more love than you get, because like I live in the beautiful city of Washington, D.C., and it's like such an accepting, like inclusive place. But also there are places where like someone's watching Survivor and you're the only representation that they might have, whether like as like a young person or like an Asian person or a queer person. And so I just want to thank you for all of that and for those wise words. I guess like maybe like the last question I want to ask is there anything else you just want to share with people about your journey? It could be like related to queerness or not, but just want to give you the space to like, I don't know, have the last words in this conversation.
Oh man, that could go anywhere.
We'll take it.
Something that I like to talk about is identity, and when identities don't overlap, as they typically don't, a lot of people find it really hard to like be able to communicate with those that either have views that are contradictory to their own or that directly threaten their own. I want to encourage people to not be so quick to write each other off, especially when you meet someone that doesn't share your viewpoint. I think we are quick to decide that, oh, you don't agree with me because you want to be contrarian or you want to upset me. Consider that their experiences is what shaped their worldview, just as your experiences shaped your worldview. And instead of writing each other off, maybe have a conversation and try to understand that if you had their lived experiences, you would be them. And I say that because I see the trend in which our country is going towards, which is incredibly divisive and combative. And that, I think, breeds a lot of violence. And I don't want young people to grow up in an environment where the only options are, I'm either your friend or I'm not your friend. Because there's a lot of middle ground and gray area that you can explore, regardless of what you might or might not agree on. And I hope we can practice more of that moving forward.
I love that. Yeah.
Love it. That's that. That's the episode. I'm gonna stop recording.
Thanks, Hi. All right, we are back. Yeah, it was a great conversation with Hi, very enlightening. I thought it was very fun, and I thought that like I was really upset, Evvie, because after we finished recording, we actually got into another conversation. I was like, oh my god, we turned off the recording, and this is so good. Hi's talking about it's very interesting, the difference in that it's so easy, I think, for specifically people of color, but also queer people to be cast as the sort of edited as the villains, which I wish we did more. Maybe we'll have to invite Hi on next year to chat more about that.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. And I had a wonderful tweet the other day, as I feel like, this idea has been going around of like cast more villains. And I saw Hi tweeted, cast more villains. If by that, something to the effect of, you mean like hot gay people of color. It's like, great. Give us more Hi's and Ricard's quote unquote villains, you know?
I mean, amen to that. I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, it was a very fun conversation. We'll be back next week with another interview. In the meantime, make sure you get your Pride is Spoken t-shirts. Are available on the RHAP's website. Yeah, Evvie's showing off their t-shirt.
Rocking the pink today.
Pink. I believe it's robiswebsite.com/shop. I always get this wrong. It'll be in the show notes as well. Get in any color you want, and make sure you tweeted us with a picture of your shirt. I know. Shout out to Michael J. Clark, who tweeted wearing his Pride is Spoken t-shirt at Pride. That's amazing. Man, get in any different color. Tweet us, hashtag the Pride is Spoken. We'll also be donating the proceeds to a charity. If you have recommendations for where we should be donating those proceeds, please tweet at us, let us know where we should, if you have any recommendations for a great charity who could use the support. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
And they look cute, most importantly.
They're amazing. They're so awesome. The logo is amazing. Shout out to Tricky who designed the logo. Anything else, Evvie, before, how are you spending your Pride? I like to, we've asked Carla and Hi how they're spending Pride.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. Okay. Well, last weekend was official Pride here in Boston, and I had an amazing weekend. I went to Dyke March, as we were talking about at the beginning. Love Dyke March. Really great vibes. And I did a lot of dancing. I went to, went out dancing after that at this great club in Boston called Legacy. If you live in Boston, best club, racially diverse, gender diverse, my favorite club in Boston. And then, did some dancing with friends all weekend. I feel like I'm really, really doing Pride right this year. And then I'm going to New York Pride in the last weekend of June with the person I'm dating and some other people. It's gonna be really fun. Yeah,
it's the same night it's the same. I think Toronto and New York have the same Pride weekend, so nice. I'll be up north in Toronto. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, one of my favorite. There's an event coming. I think it's tonight as we're recording this, which is there's a Toronto has a Ripley's Aquarium, which is amazing on its own, but then they have Night at the Aquarium.
Oh my God, Night at the Aquarium.
Yeah,
I ever heard.
Which is drag performances. The whole thing is like lit because it's all like underwater. It's like lit amazingly. It's amazing. Yeah, it's a really good event. Yeah,
I love that.
It's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of good. I think because like Toronto, it's the end of the month. Just the whole month is like full of. There's I think drag queens at the zoo. It's a lot of drag queens showing up to different locations, tourist locations in Toronto to do Pride basically.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I feel like
aquarium. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, well, is Toronto a small city? Is that about to be offensive if I say it's
we're not small. We're pretty big.
Okay.
Let me look at the population.
It was about to be offensive. Okay. Well, anyway,
we're like 3 mil basically.
Okay. No, that's extremely legit. Well, I feel like cities anyway, I think of like the biggest cities like San Francisco, New York. This is probably America centered, and I'm about to get canceled by the Canadians. But anyway, I think other cities tend to have really sweet queer scenes, like because it's like you wouldn't necessarily think of it as like the queerest city, but then it's like all the queer people make all the cool stuff. And so anyway, love that.
I think Toronto just there was something about Toronto being one of the gayest cities in the world. So yeah, I mean, we have a really great queer scene. If people have not been, it's awesome. Church Street, yeah, that's the place to go. I live just off Queen Street, and the joke in Toronto is that Queen Street is this long running like east to west thing, but all the churches are on Queen Street and all the queens are on Church Street.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Love it.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week. If you send your love to Hi, reply to the tweet, or send some love. Appreciate all the LGBTQ survivors who have come on the Pride is Spoken and shared their stories. Get personal with us. Much appreciated. So yeah, send your love their way. Evvie, what else? What do you got going on? Where can people find you?
Okay, you can find me at Evvie Jagoda on Instagram and Twitter, and on TikTok. My account is that, but it is still hacked.
Report it.
We're going to get it back by the end of Pride Month. Let's hope. So if you are listening to this, you're on TikTok, please go ahead and report that account. Hopefully I can get it back. If you are still watching the Queer Ultimatum or watched it and didn't check out my coverage with Asia and Mary over on the Love at First Sight feed, we had so much fun talking about that show. We even had Claire from Survivor 44 join us for an episode, and we had wonderful guests throughout. So check it out. I feel like people are still talking about this show perfect show for Pride Month. So
High
yeah.
name drops queer ultimate queer love. Yeah,
of course
in
he
the
does.
podcast. Yeah. I'll quickly give a shout out to Matt's social media at Matt Scott GW, talking. I think a Pod Friends series is coming. The Wrestling RHAP Up is back. They're doing their summer series. We had a great. I don't think would have referenced it last week, but I was invited on to the Wrestling RHAP Up along with Victoria Cage and Billy Dixon. Billy Dixon is an LGBTQ, a gay wrestler. Was rated, I think, the #1 gay wrestler in the world a few years ago. So that's cool. And we chatted about pride and wrestling and its queerness. Wrestling is super gay, just so everybody knows. So that was a really fun conversation. Check that out over on Wrestling RHAP Up. I'm talking movies and Succession and The Idol, the show we're watching so you don't have to. Black Mirror came back. So yeah, all sorts of stuff. You can catch it on Twitter at Hi From Grace. We'll be back next week with another really exciting interview. I'm really excited about who we're chatting with next week. We'll keep it a surprise until it hits your feeds. Until then, the Pride has spoken.